Guys, we're back at it again with more things you might not have known you could do in Final Cut. This is a sequel to a video that you guys went wild for, so I hope I can impress you today as much as I did with that other video. If you didn't see it, I'll link to it here and down in the description box, but you don't have to watch that one before you watch this one. This is just 25 cool things that you might not have known Final Cut can do. Let's get down to the nitty-gritty. Okay, first up, did you know that you can bring an entire folder into an event in Final Cut and it automatically creates a keyword collection for you? This is such a great time saver and helps keep you organized. All right, the next tip is all about skimming. You know, you can turn your skimmer on here and you can scrub across your timeline and see your shots. I actually don't like having skimming turned on while I'm editing in the timeline. I find it kind of annoying, but where I do like it is up here in the browser. You can skim through these clips without having to make range selections. So for me, I love having skimming on only when I'm working in the browser. The shortcut for this is S. Here's another great one for you. Have you ever had a situation where you shot a video in typical 16:9 aspect ratio for a client, and then they come back to you and say, hey, we need a vertical version for our Instagram reel or TikTok or something like that? It's so easy to do that in Final Cut. Let me show you how. So you'll just want to take your original project and modify the video format to vertical. And then you can see what we have here. Our 16:9 aspect ratio is preserved, but the video is shrunk down into this vertical format. Let me show you something. I'm going to select all of my clips here in my timeline. I'm going to head up to Modify, and we're going to select Smart Conform. And now Final Cut is going to analyze our clips, and it's going to try to identify the most important part of the frame, typically someone's face, and watch the magic happen. Right now you can see it's showing us what has been cropped out of our shot. But if we play it, we can see what it's really going to look like in that vertical format. Sometimes the text gets a little dicey and you have to manually adjust it. But I find more often than not, Final Cut does an amazing job of identifying what's important in a frame and centering it right up for me on that vertical format. Smart Conform is amazing. All right, my next trick is for all of you who aren't the best spellers. This is the Find and Replace Text tool. Let's say that you've misspelled someone's name multiple times throughout a project, or kind of a tricky word like, I don't know, amphitheater. I mean, I would never do that, but you know, some of you, it might happen, right? So to fix all of them so easily at once, head up to Edit and come down to Find and Replace Title Text, and then type in the word that you got wrong and then what you want to replace it with. And then just hit the Replace All button, and every instance of that misspelling has now been fixed. Really comes in handy. My next one is also a time saver. Have you ever had a situation where you use a really fun transition throughout a project and then your client is like, hey, can we just change those all to cross dissolves? And you're like, oh, but there's a really easy way to go about solving something like that. We're gonna head on over to the index and just search for the name of your transition and then select all of the search results down here in your index. Then you can head it over to your transitions bin and double click the transition you want to change them all to, and now they've all been replaced. My next tip is all about exporting with alpha channels. Did you know that not all of your video exports need to be squared off? They can actually be any shape you want. If you cut out a video clip using a mask like this circle mask here, I can actually export it with the alpha channel, which means that the video file will only be this circle. So I can overlay it onto something else in the future. To do that, you're just going to hit the share button and export the file. Head on over to settings, and the video codec you're looking for is either Apple ProRes 4444 or 4444XQ, which is going to give you an even bigger file. And now if I bring that video back into Final Cut, you can see it's actually cut out. Another great tool in Final Cut is that you can record your own voiceovers. Just head up to the Window tab and select Record Voiceover. You get this little pop-up box. If you have a microphone hooked up to your computer, You could record your own voiceover. Just hit that red record button and it'll start dropping in your voiceover right into your timeline. And so you can narrate what you're seeing as it plays. We'll hit stop there. You could see the waveforms here and you can edit it just like any other audio clip in Final Cut. Hey guys, before I get to my next Final Cut trick, if you like this video, if you feel like you're learning something, let me know. Give me that thumbs up, hit that subscribe button, and ring the bell so you never miss a future upload. Another great cheat is the range check feature here in Final Cut. Just head up to the top right of the viewer and come down here to range check. You have options for Luma, saturation, or all, which would really just be both. The Luma range tells you if your blacks are really crushed or if your whites are out of range. And your saturation tells you if your colors are oversaturated. This isn't a replacement for using the video scopes, but it is kind of a quick cheat. My next tip is all about restoring Final Cut to its default properties if you want to switch everything back to factory settings. When you launch Final Cut, just hold down the Option and Command keys, and it'll switch everything back to default settings. My next trick for you is replace and retime to fit. If you've ever grabbed a clip out of your browser and dragged it over a clip in your timeline, let go of your mouse button, and you see this option here, replace with retime to fit. Let's select that, and I'll show you what it does. Because this source clip from the browser was longer than the clip in my timeline, it has sped up that clip. Now, if this source clip had been shorter in duration than the clip we were replacing in the timeline, that clip would have been slowed down. That is how replace and retime to fit works. I think it used to be called fit to fill. Does anyone else remember that? Speaking of clips in the browser, did you know that when you go through your clips in the browser, you can mark the best sections of your clips and review them later? So to do that, you could make a selection in your browser on a particular clip and then just hit the F key, and you see this little green highlight you get here. Let's do that on a couple more clips. And now watch this. Let's head up to all clips here, hit this drop down and select favorites. And now we see not those entire clips here in our browser, we just see those individual sections. You can also do the opposite by rejecting parts of clips, by making your selection and hitting the delete key. And instead you get this, I think it's red. Is it red or orange? This little highlight at the top of your clip. Head on over to all clips and show rejected, and there it is, your rejects. This is great if you have a lot of media you're combing through and you just want to be able to go through it all at once, batch your tasks by identifying the parts of the clips you really like or really hate, and then it really speeds up your editing down the road if you take the time to do this step up front. Let's talk audio for a second. Have you ever wondered what the difference is between loudness and volume? They are actually not the same thing. If you select your clip in your timeline, head on up to the inspector window, you can change the volume with this slider here. But if you head on down to audio analysis and reveal the audio analysis options by hitting the show button here, you get these other options. This one here, loudness, let's check it and expand it. And you can see here that we can actually pump up the loudness amount, and we can also play with the uniformity. What is the difference between these two settings? Volume is just kind of a global, like pump up the volume on everything, whereas loudness tries to make everything more uniform. So when you're adjusting your levels with your audio, keep in mind the difference. Sometimes you might want to reach for loudness, not volume. All right, our next trick is about what's called the event viewer. If I'm working around here in my browser, you can see that when I make a selection in the browser, whatever I'm viewing there pops into my viewer here instead of what's on my timeline. If we head up to the window menu and then show in workspace event viewer, look at what happens. We get a second viewer here. So this is a bigger image of what I'm working with in the browser, and then I can still see what's here in my timeline. This is a very old school way of editing. Does everyone remember Final Cut 7? This is how it was set up, because when you looked at clips in Final Cut 7, you didn't get to see these thumbnails. You only saw this view, text of the names of the clips. So you had two windows here. When Final Cut 10 came around, they switched this to a thumbnail view, and the event viewer didn't seem that necessary anymore. So now you have to work to reveal that event viewer. But I don't know, some people might miss having those two viewer windows. If you're one of them, turn on that event viewer. My next tip is really going to save some of you a major headache with something you may have been struggling with. If you have a text template from, let's say, a site like Motion Array, sometimes they can be frustrating to work with because the animation and how fast it moves is directly tied to how long that you have that text in your shot. And you don't have the controls in the title inspector to make things happen faster or slower, or to make it not animate out if you don't want it to. So how do you work around that? Let me show you really quick. What you can do is, let's say on this title here, we didn't want this title to animate out, but we did want it on for most of the duration of our clip. What I'm going to do is select it here in my timeline, hit Option G, to create a compound clip. Let's open up that compound clip, and I'm going to extend this title further than what I'm actually seeing here in my timeline. So you can see the grayed out area is the leftover bits of my title animation. So what I'm actually doing is cutting off that end animation. So when we play it back, the text animates in, but we've cropped out that animate out. It's going to stay on there for the entire duration of our clip. And so that's how you can work around text titles that don't have the build in or build out option. All right, our next tip here is up in the color board. If you want to change, let's say, the saturation on this shot, what would you normally do? You would grab the puck with your mouse and you would move it up. But what we can do is select one of these pucks and then just use the arrow key to incrementally adjust those values instead of using the mouse, where it can feel like things happen faster than you want them to. My next trick for you is what's called split captions. If you add captions to your project, you can just type in an entire paragraph and it all appears as one long caption throughout your project. However, if you head on up to the inspector window and just add some return lines in the appropriate places in your script, you can now select that caption, head back up to Edit, Captions, and select Split Captions. And now it's splitting those captions at the return lines into separate elements. And then you can just move these captions around and retime them perfectly to match your video. I still would love to see Final Cut add an auto captions feature. I think we're all waiting for that. But in the meantime, this is definitely a bit helpful. My next trick is all about gap clips. Gap clips are always black, right? They're actually not. Gap clips are whatever color you set your background to in your viewer. So you could make your gap clips white. So if you knew you had a lot of text, you wanted over a white background, it's a bit of a shortcut to make your player window white. Let me show you how to do that. Just head on up to Final Cut Pro and select Preferences, then come on over to Playback, and here is your player background. And your options are black, white, or checkerboard. I do wish that you could make this any color you wanted. I think it would be a great time saver in situations where you, instead of reaching for the generators all the time, you could just hit that Option W shortcut and create a gap clip in whatever color you wanted. But for now, this is what we have to work with. But you do have more flexibility than just the black. Speaking of gap clips, let's move on to what are called placeholders. If you head on over to generators and select elements, you'll see this guy here, placeholder. Let's drop it in our timeline. And this placeholder does a lot more than you think it might at first glance. If you select the placeholder, head on over to the generator inspector, and you can actually make a lot of changes to this placeholder. Now, why would you need this function? It's really great if you're awaiting clips for a project that you're editing and you kind of want to put something in there that resembles what you expect to capture in the future. You can actually really customize this placeholder by, let's say, changing the framing here with this drop down. We can crop in, we can change how many people are in the shot, and we can make it a mix of men and women or all one gender. Let's go back to that long shot and I'll show you more. We can actually turn off the people so there's no one here, and then you can change the scene with a lot of different options here. And you can even do this. Look at this. Interior, we can check that box. So now you're inside a physical space, but the background you selected is seen out the window. And then the other thing you can do, let's turn on view notes. You can type in notes here about what you expect to see. It almost works like a storyboard function here in Final Cut. And I don't reach for this one a lot, but it has come in handy a couple times when I'm working in a situation where I don't have everything that I'm going to expect to have in my edit, and I have a client that can't really picture like what's going to be in that shot. I find that this is like a really great illustration to kind of help them along and envision what we're working toward, instead of just a black screen with some text on it that it describes what we're going to see. All right, my next trick for you is the optical flow. Have you ever had a situation where you've had to slow down a shot and it looks really herky-jerky like this? Not the best look. We might be able to get a better result by adjusting some settings here. Let's head to the top of the menu to modify, and then down to retime, and then under video quality, let's change this to frame blending. Not loving that. Let's give the next one a try. Modify, retime, video quality, and let's switch it instead to optical flow. Yeah, wow, you guys, that optical flow worked so well. Sometimes you have to try frame blending or optical flow depending on your shot and the composition of it. Sometimes one works better than the other, but in this case, that optical flow solved a lot of problems really great. My next trick is about backtiming overwrite edit. So an overwrite edit is where you take a shot from a browser and you overwrite not just one clip in your timeline, but anything in the timeline that's the duration of your browser selection. So watch what happens here in this browser window. This clip selection is 2 seconds and 21 frames. And down here in my timeline, this shot that I've got selected is actually less than that. Watch what happens when I hit the D shortcut. See what it does? It overwrites not just that shot we replaced, but even part of the next incoming shot. Let me hit Command Z to undo that. If we wanted to backtime that edit, watch what happens here. I'm going to cue up my playhead to after this shot, and I'm going to hit Shift and D, and now that overwrite is actually going to work backward in the timeline. My next trick is all about what are called slide edits. You may not have ever made an edit like this before, but it allows you to move a clip around in your timeline without creating gap clips or changing its duration. To access this feature, you're going to want to hit T for the trim tool, and then you're going to hold down the Option key. See how my cursor changed there? And then I can drag this clip around and shorten or lengthen the clip before or after and not change the duration of that clip. My next Final Cut trick is called play around. You know that if you've got your playhead queued up in your timeline, you hit the space bar, your project will play for wherever that playhead started. But watch this, I'm gonna bring it back to that cut, and I'm going to enable the play around feature. I'm going to hit the Shift key and the question mark key at the same time. Watch what happens when my playback begins. Did you see that? The playback jumped back 2 seconds in my timeline before it started playing again. It gives you kind of a head start on your playback, so it just jumps back a little bit in time so you don't miss anything. You can change the duration of that time. So in this case, the default is 2 seconds by heading on up to Final Cut Pro, go to Preferences, and here where it says pre-roll duration, we could change that to 5 seconds. And then the post-roll where it stopped playing, we could change to, let's say, 10. And let's try that again. I'm going to hit the Shift key, question mark, and watch. Did you see that? It jumped back 5 seconds, and it's going to keep playing for 10 seconds after where my playhead originally started. By the way, guys, these shots are all from ArtGrid. If you like what you see, I have a link down in the description box. Not sponsored, just love it. Lately, they've just been bringing it with the B-roll, and I'm so into these shots. My next Final Cut trick is about to-do markers. These are so handy for reminding you to go back and fix things you wanted to fix. So to access them, you're just gonna hit M in your timeline to create a marker, and then you can just double click on the marker to open this pop-up window. So the first option here is just your basic marker. You might might use this to mark the beats on a cut of music if you're trying to cut to music. This last one here is to add chapters if you so chose, but I really like this middle one here. It is the to do. You can remind yourself of something you need to worry about later, like let's say add text, and that marker turns red. And then when you're done, you can reopen it and check completed and it turns green. My next tip for you is all about merging your events. You can actually drag one event to the next. So all the contents will now belong in one event. To access this another way, you can just select them both, head on up to File and select Merge Events. Sometimes if you feel like your little file folders are getting out of hand and you just want to condense everything, this is a nice feature. And guys, here is my last tip for you. If you wanted to fade in a connected clip, yeah, you could just add a cross dissolve. That's probably the easiest way to do it. But there is another way if you're interested. Just select that connected clip, select Control V to open up the animation options. And then here under compositing opacity, hit this drop down. And now you've got these teardrops that you can work with. And you can fade things out in this way with a little bit more control. All right, there you go, guys. 25 things you may or may not have known you could do in Final Cut. Was any of them your favorite? Let me know in the comments. You guys, thank you so much for hanging out with me today. I will see you again.